He's like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down into the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like the dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's all the time.
All right, George Bagby, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you. This is another episode in my unofficial series of if I talk about the Iran war every day, I will go crazy. And so deliberately deciding to talk about something that is not relevant, at least explicitly, to what's happening in the headlines. And so, Bagby, we're here to discuss the 2016 film Hail Caesar.
And it's a good absurdist way to get away from the current thing. The Coen brothers are my favorite comic writers of the day. Their comedies are some of my oldest favorites. My wife and I, as a kind of guilty pleasure, we get no end of enjoyment out of The Big Lebowski, which is one of our favorite films, and it's just a classic. It's not for everyone, especially those who are adverse to the language. It's very colorful in its language, notoriously, but it's such an absurd comic masterpiece, and that's something that I really love about the Coens. They are such a dynamic force in movie making. They go from masterpieces, just stupendous achievements like No Country for Old Men, and they've also made these really slapstick sorts of comic movies like Raising Arizona with Nicolas Cage doing one of his madman routines. They've also made these really distinctive regional films, which is something that I particularly love about them. They made Miller's Crossing, which was one of their earlier movies.
One of my favorites.
It's a really good one. Did you know that one was shot almost entirely in Louisiana, specifically New Orleans?
Huh. But I didn't, but that actually makes quite a lot of sense.
You wouldn't know it by watching the film. I don't think they ever reference Louisiana in the film, but it was all shot in Louisiana. I found out that one of the scenes, the distinctive forest scene in Miller's Crossing, where he takes John Turturro. Gabriel Byrne takes John Turturro out into the forest, and John Turturro's pitifully begging for his life. He knows what everyone expects to happen. He's supposed to kill him. That was shot in a place that I know, and it's all very familiar to me. But outside of the city, obviously, it's a forest. But in Louisiana,
well, and that's actually funny. Because I did not know that. Several things about that film. One, it is one of the funniest non-comedy films. Like, there's not a lot of jokes in it per se, but it's genuinely hilarious. Like, there's one moment I always think where, Gabriel Burns is tied to a chair, and you're sort of expecting him to get, this, beaten, with the swinging light. And he just gets up, grabs the chair, and breaks it over one of the guys interrogating him. And the reaction, the man just looks so genuinely offended. He's been hit with a chair. Very, very funny. But additionally, it's funny you mentioned that, because I just assumed, because of the subject matter, that it was set in Chicago. It seems like a Chicago-esque film. And I was thinking about that when they're walking through the woods. I was like, this doesn't look anything like Illinois. Right? This looks like the middle of nowhere in the deep South. And so that actually makes a good bit of sense.
Yeah, they actually talked about that. They said New Orleans is this unchanged, like 19th century relic, and they didn't have to dress up the streets where they were shooting. They actually interviewed about that and said, yeah, we didn't have to replace the windows or the shutters or anything because they're all original. No one has renovated these old buildings, and so it looks just like it did at the turn of the century, which is one of the reasons why I adore New Orleans. It's this untouched old city in a way. It's simultaneously New Orleans' best selling point and its downfall, that they haven't invested in their own city in such obvious ways, but it's also the charm of the place. But they've made, as I said, all these really interesting regional films, and I think this is the best testimony, in spite of the Coens being very famously Amish. The regional work that they've done with Fargo, with Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, it comes from a place of love and affection. Even The Big Lebowski as like a set piece for Southern California. Southern California hippie characters, deadbeats, stuff like that. It comes from a place of real affection. And the easiest way to tell that is, do you come out of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou hating Mississippi? Or do you come out of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou thinking, wow, I really like Mississippi. Like there are a lot of winsome points and beauty and curiosity about these funny, country white people. And I think that's the best tell about the Coens, that they love their subject matter. And they also produced a personal favorite of mine, which is a Serious Man. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't, but I need to.
Oh, that is a really good one. It's set in some Jewish community in Minnesota or something. I guess Bob Dylan's diaspora, way up there in the distant north. And it introduced to me the term goy, which is used very frequently in that film. That film is a black comedy, and it's kind of a retelling of the story of Job, a man who faces like every possible personal disaster and is meditating on the mystery of his situation. And it's extremely good, just in its own right. But I really like that one. So about the Coens, they have a great affection for Americana, for American regions, for the Gentile majority of the United States. They really seem to like these people. And that's really my brief for them. The fact that they are famously Amish is an interesting factor in the film that we have for discussion today. It's the 2016 film Hail Caesar. And the image of Christ haunts this film in a really surprising way, especially because it comes from non-Christian writers. The very first image that you see when the title fades is a crucifix in a Catholic church. And the very first scene is the protagonist, who is a Hollywood fixer, a real historical character, by the way, who worked for big studios in LA, Eddie Mannix, who's kind of fictionalized for this. He's kind of a legend in Hollywood, as I understand it. Portrayed by Josh Brolin, and he is he does a wonderful job in this role. You know, the stoic and strong Josh Brolin. He's sitting in a confessional, and he's a very scrupulous Catholic. He's going to confession with spans of hours between his confessions. So he's he's obviously a man that takes his religious ritual very seriously. The priest in the confessional is telling him, "Oh, my son, you're doing this too much. You're not this bad, you know." And he goes to the confessional to say, "I lied to my wife. I snuck a cigarette. I told her I was quitting." And he breaks down and he says, I'm trying. And then he leaves the confessional and he's this completely stoical, driven, tough guy. The force of order and justice in the film.
Well, and I think that opening is really dramatic to sort of set up that sort of dyad, because he leaves. It's this sort of gloomy, rainy night, and he walks into this LA bungalow, basically kicks the door open, and one of the studio's starlets is at kind of a racy photo shoot with this. Is it Steve Buscemi, the photographer, or some other kind of like similarly scummy looking actor? And
yes.
He walks up, pulls out the negatives, tells the guys to leave, smacks her in a moment that's very kind of like Silver Age Hollywood, right? You can almost imagine Jimmy Stewart, right? Holding her close and kind of slapping her across the face. And then when the police come in, he's given her a fake story. He hands a bribe to the policeman and they leave, right? Kind of contrasting that, how he is at work, is this kind of laying down the law. And then, this very tender family man, right, in the confessional booth.
Yeah, it's this great contrast, and this is a contrast that we see through the rest of the picture. And the big questions in the film are about dream and reality, about fantasy and truth, about what is real and what we believe in, what we believe is real. And this is one of the major elements that we encounter through the entire film. And we're drawn back to that distinction repeatedly in the dialogue. It's a really fast-paced film. There are lots of different characters and a bunch of different little subplots, many of which are just comic gold. But it's always turning back to that. What do we understand to be what is going on? What is real versus what are we projecting about ourselves? What do we believe about the circumstances? So faith turns out to be one of the key themes of the film. And as I said, the character of Jesus Christ literally portrayed in the film in the context of the movie within the movie. So Eddie Mannix is managing the production of this big tentpole production for the studio. It's a film called Hail Caesar. And this is the source of most of the drama in this picture, also called Hail Caesar, but it's like the movie within the movie. This is obviously a satire of Ben-Hur and some other 1950s epic biblical films like The Robe and Quo Vadis and things like that.
Well, Hail Caesar, I can't remember what it's called. The other one, right? It's like is it the Tablets of Noah the Tablets of Moses? Is that what I'm thinking of?
Oh, the Ten Commandments, maybe.
Yes, that's what.
Yeah, Charlton Heston. Is that must be Cecil D. DeMille or something? One of those great old epics. I've got these things on the list. I just played Ben-Hur for my children recently because I remember watching it at about their age and it having a major impact on me. So it's kind of fresh on my mind right now. But we see with the production of this film, the set or the setting for this movie is the 50s. It's like the golden age of Hollywood. And some of the things that we see in the context, it's a Christian country. And the Hollywood studios are wanting to present an image of themselves and of their stars, who are certainly not like traditional moral kinds of people. They want to present an image of moral norms. They want to present an image of spiritual norms. And of course, there's a cynical reading of this film that it's meant to discredit the society in which that it's portraying, right? That it's these dissolute Hollywood people who are projecting a sense of normalcy on the screen when the reality is moral degradation in Hollywood. Mannix is constantly encountering that paradox. So he has gossip columnists coming up to him constantly, and they're saying, "Oh, I know about this scandal. I'm going to publicize it tomorrow." And he says, "No, the actor is a good family man. Everyone knows that." And this is a really interesting element here. But I think that the Coens really have a genuine affection for the mainstream that they're presenting here. I don't think they're trying to take them down a peg. They're attacking the corruption in Hollywood. They're lampooning it in the film, especially the writers, which we're going to get to. But we see the Hollywood is in the business of making dreams, of projecting images on the side of Plato's cave. And Eddie Mannix is dealing with the real problems at the base of this projection apparatus. So these themes of what is true, what is fantasy, what do we believe? And the whole time, Jesus Christ is lurking in the background. Jesus Christ very clearly surfaces in several important discussions in the film as the key question to all of this. Is Jesus Christ significant? Is he real? Does he demand faith of us or not? Even the question, is Jesus Christ God, is a serious question that's presented in this satirical context.
Well, and,
now for
George,
these
to that
reasons,
point,
yes,
if I can just break in, if it's not the immediate next scene to the one I just described, it's very shortly after that, which is of course played for laughs, but it's, Mannix's meeting with, the Protestant pastor, the Orthodox bishop, and then a Catholic priest and a rabbi. And of course, they're there to discuss, the presence of, Christ in this film. And there are several things, because in a cheaper movie, of course, I mean, it is comedic, right? It is played for laughs, that all four of these religious figures are offering, that this man effectively, kind of scraps of, Christology, right? And he's deeply confused. But at the same time, we see that same sort of love for America, that all four of these men, they're not caricatures, they're positive characters. And particularly coming from the Coens, it's interesting that if anyone comes out of that interaction looking badly, right, it's the kind of very nebbish rabbi. And, that's not the focus or the goal of this film. But again, right, that's where from almost the very beginning, you see the presence of Christ in Hail Caesar.
And that scene is my personal favorite in the film. It's also the most daring thing I think Hollywood has put on the screen in a very long time. It's a comic scene. Anyone watching that scene is going to find it hilarious, no matter what they believe. I think. I think it's naturally hysterical. But we'll come around to that here in just a minute. I do have some notes on it. But that scene you mentioned is absolutely brilliant. So one of the themes, I told you faith is the key word in the film. It appears in the climax of the film at the very end. And it's the forgotten line. An actor is delivering a speech in front of the crucified Christ in the climax of the movie, within the movie. And he forgets the pinnacle of his speech. And the word he forgets is faith. And this is intentional, obviously. They're trying to emphasize the point. The one thing that they lack, as the actor almost gets to say when he forgets the last word, if we could only have this one final thing, and that is faith, then we could see what is true. And so we see it all come together there at the end. But we see conflicts of faith in the film in a big way, and that's with the communist subversives in Hollywood. And so they present a different kind of faith. This is the faith in ideological materialism and Marxism. And their faith and what it leads them to is also played for laughs. They're ham-fisted sort of attempts to blackmail Hollywood and to fund the Soviet Union, which is what their ultimate goal is. It comes to nothing in the end, and it's all very absurd. But that is another element. So we see the Coens, they're framing the two faiths presented in the film. You have traditional Christianity, faith in the doctrine of Christ. And then you have an innovative new ideology, which is communism, which they don't hold back on for their disdain. They think that these people maybe don't even deserve to be taken seriously. They're such ridiculous characters. They don't portray the clergy this way at all. The clergy are taking these things more seriously. They're very confused. And the scene with the clergy is absurdist and is meant to create laughs, but they're obviously talking about serious things. So we see this bifurcation. You have destructive faith, faith that is finally motivated by vengeance. In the case of the communists pretend to portray themselves, or they want to portray themselves as these believers in materialist dogma. They are actually motivated by very low, vengeful, pecuniary interests. And this comes out really obviously with them.
Well, and I think that's another part of this that I found particularly funny is obviously the sort of drama of this, the inciting incident is that the main actor in Hail Caesar has been captured and held for ransom by these communist writers. And some of the best comedy in the film is him talking to these Marxist writers and sort of mutually convincing themselves that he is a Marxist. But the funny thing is, this character played by Clooney is such an abject narcissist that he is recreating everything in his own life, right? So it is all, his sort of like background Hollywood relationships explained through Marxist theory. It's the only way he can understand it. He has no way to conceptualize really outside of like his incredibly petty foibles. It's very, very funny. And to that point, there's a really hilarious moment where, they've sort of told him that they're that he has been kidnapped, which happens after this kind of absurd, kind of like Marxist debate over finger sandwiches, where, they're sitting across the room, and he basically says, he's like, well, what happens if I just tell everyone who you are? And it becomes very clear that these these Marxists have not even considered this. This is the most poorly conceived plan. And so, to your point, right? Obviously, there is at least some level of sympathy for these men, because we see that they are, from a certain perspective, they're sort of being ripped off, but they're so sort of incompetent and bumbling, and as you said, greedy, that they come off really as say villains isn't quite the right term, because there is a more villainous character who sort of serves as the ringleader, but they are painted much more harshly than the clergy or the normal Americans, as we see one of the other kind of rising stars, the character of Hobie Doyle, who is this sort of like small town actual cowboy who's become a lead in westerns. And in a cheaper movie, he would be the bumbling rube, the idiot, the redneck. But he's played very sympathetically, right? He is a character that you are supposed to feel for. And the kind of, sinister homosexual Hollywood mafia is really the villain of this movie, which, to your point, that is a very brave thing for Hollywood to say in 2016.
Absolutely. And that, again, it just goes back to my point. I genuinely believe the Coens like Hobie Doyle. They like the old stock American cowboy character, the very simple guy who isn't very good talking on screen, and yet he's a movie star. He's one of the more compelling characters in the film. So about the communist meeting with George Clooney's character. George Clooney is the lead in this sword and sandals epic, Hail Caesar. Again, the film within the film is subtitled A Tale of the Christ, which is kind of an allusion to Ben-Hur. That was the subtitle for Ben-Hur as well. And there are lots of different in jokes that are related to Ben-Hur, such as the tactic of never showing the face of the actor portraying Jesus Christ. Or and George Clooney kind of.
Well, and the one quote we get from the Orthodox clergy is when he says, "I liked it, but I thought jumping from one chariot to the other seemed a bit fake," which, of course, is both a reference and kind of a comedic moment. But sorry, I've interrupted you for probably the 10th time, George.
Yes, indeed. The meeting with the clergy. I'm gonna compare these two meetings: the meeting with Mannix and the Christian clergy, and the meeting with Clooney's character, which his name is Whitlock, with the communists. There are certain parallels between these two meetings. When Mannix meets with the clergy, it's very interesting that the Protestant pastor and the Catholic priest are both going towards the theology. They're trying to argue about the details of the theology, and the rabbi gets involved with that, and he says, well, this is all nonsense. The Trinity is nonsense. Christ was not God. He says that, which is a really incredible thing to portray on screen, just by itself. was a very courageous thing to do, to put that on screen. And of course, it's played for laughs, which kind of diffuses the tension, which I think is necessary in order to present such a thing. But it's also very valuable. The Orthodox bishop who is in this scene is obviously my favorite. That's my representation here. The Orthodox bishop, I think, is the one that takes it as seriously as it needs to be taken. He is not arguing theological points. Curiously, Eddie Mannix, after interacting with the Catholic priest is trying to talk about the dual nature of Christ, that he's both completely God and completely man. And this is Christian dogma. There's nothing controversial about saying this. Mannix is confused. Now, he's an observant Catholic, but he's also not very deep in the theology. So he says, so God is split? And the Catholic priest says, well, yes, and no. Which is also the Christian answer, that he's one being with two complete natures at the same time, which is kind of paradoxical, but that's the doctrine of the Trinity. The Orthodox bishop, he references the Bible. He says, well, we have the Bible, you know. And Mannix says, well, yeah, but we have pictures too. And that's what we're doing here. And that's what I'm getting your advice on. He's going to try to refocus. The Orthodox bishop says, he says some mystical things. He says, well, God is who he is. And this infuriates the rabbi. He says, you think that's special? Who isn't who he is? But his take is entirely mystical. And then the Mannix, he asks them all, well, would any reasonable person object to our portrayal? And they all say, no, I think this is all fine. I think it's tastefully done. The Orthodox priest says, oh, I've seen worse. Which is just a wonderful sort of detached sort of approach, which I much appreciate. I think that he comes out of that maybe looking less serious than any of his comrades there, but from a certain perspective, maybe more serious than all the rest of them put together. Now, when the communists, when they assemble with Whitlock after they've kidnapped him, they've employed the villain from Jurassic Park to drug Whitlock's wine in a movie scene. Did you notice that actor?
No, I didn't even think about that, but now remembering it, that's exactly who that is.
Yeah, I looked him up because I thought I recognized him. He's the big round guy from Jurassic Park who's trying to blackmail the park. I forget exactly what he was doing, but he meets his untimely end with the giant frilled lizard. He makes a little appearance there, and he poisons George Clooney's wine and then carries him off into captivity. Clooney wakes up and he spends the entire film in his Roman legionary costume, which is also very comic. Like, he's carrying a sword in every scene. He sits down with these communists and they say, oh, we're a reading group, you know. And he goes, oh, what are you talking about? And they say, we're talking about history and economics because it's the same thing, you know. Don't you agree? And they say, well, history is science. History is determined by materialistic formula. So we can explain everything that has happened and everything that will happen according to our formula. So we know what the future will be. This is inevitable. And we are on the side of the future. And once they get into the discussion, we see the parallel emerge. Clooney is asking for clarification, and he asks one of the communists, so man is split? And the communist says, yes, we have two classes. We've got the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And they're in conflict with one another, and we know the means to resolve this conflict. It's going to be, the future utopia. and it's going to solve the dialectic of history. And this is just all orthodox Marxism. But in the background of the meeting, we have all these communist members. They're all Hollywood writers. They're also all Amish, which is coincident here. Many of these are kind of minor Hollywood actors that, as is the case with a lot of Coen brothers movies, they've appeared in other previous elements in their filmography. And a lot of those in the communist group had previously been in A Serious Man, which portrays this Amish community in Minnesota. So they're ethnic actors, and they're portraying communist subversives in Hollywood, and they brag that they've inserted their Marxist doctrine into their screenwriting. But they're all personally vindictive. They want to loot the studios because they believe they deserve more. And this comes out really clearly. That there are several members of the group that are perpetually angry, and they just randomly belt out things, screaming, "They're exploiters! They deserve to be destroyed!" And they're just randomly shouting in the background, and another character is constantly telling them to shut up. Doesn't matter what one of these guys says, whatever he says, another character is always telling him to shut up, and it's very funny. But we see that this kind of faith is a belief that man is split into two distinct classes, into warring classes, and this explains everything. Whereas the clergy are talking about the nature of God, that God is split, and this determines man's relation to God, so that God became man. And this is a kind of split in the divinity, though we insist this is unity, this is the doctrine of the Trinity, but that God is both completely man and completely God in the person of Jesus Christ. So it's a complex theological dogma, but it's also a feature in the film, and we're invited to consider it. And that's really extraordinary. Now, this isn't a Christian film, given its makers, but I think they were taking it seriously, and they were presenting it fairly. One reading of the film, which I've encountered in the reviews, is that this is all played cynically. I don't think it has to be read this way. I certainly enjoy it as an Orthodox Christian. I take these dogmas entirely seriously, and I find the film extremely entertaining. Because I don't think it's doing it any discredit.
Well, certainly, and I feel like the reason that I know this film is not cynical is the sort of rising star, small town American we mentioned earlier, because that character is played for laughs. For instance, he sort of goes through. He's cast in this sort of, period ballroom drama. The other actors, the director, are very proper, trained British actors. And, while clearly he is a fish out of water, the relationship between him and the director, which is Lawrence in the film, but I mean, it seems to be sort of a pastiche of like Laurence Olivier, is that the Brit is acting horribly to him. You feel for him. And later, he goes on this sort of studio arranged date with this other star. And we see him again acting very genuinely. He likes this girl. He is, interacting with her in a very non-cynical, non-predatory way. And he is, in fact, the man who, returns George Clooney to the studio. He ends up rescuing him. And it would be very easy to play that character as a rube, to play him, as an untalented moron. But, at this date he goes on, this woman, this premiere, we see that he's actually a very talented musician. And obviously there is some dissonance, because while he is singing this sort of beautiful song, there's the kind of stock, Prospector Pete character in the background, fumbling around and, falling into the pig trough. And we see the crowd laughing, and he's looking around like, well, yeah, it's funny, but also, I sang this song, it was an emotional moment. And, he is, sort of on the B plot for at least most of this. But again, this is normal small town American. He is shown to be very naive, but he is a force for good in the film, and is honestly better than pretty much any other actor on a moral level we see in this film.
And he's obviously the outsider in Hollywood as well. And he's not a victim either. He could be victimized easily by these cynical power players that he's interacting with. He is very resourceful. He's also trustworthy. Eddie Mannix just instinctively trusts him, though he's aware of his limitations, because he's like a comic Western actor. The kinds of films they see, you see Hobie Doyle acting in at the very beginning, what he got his start in, what made him a minor, Western star in Hollywood. It's corresponded to how John Wayne got his start. Did you ever see those really early John Wayne movies, those old black and white ones where he's a young man? He invariably jumps off of a cliff on horseback into water. They redo that shot. They probably recycled one shot and put it in a dozen movies or something, because it must have been so very dangerous to pull off this horse jumping over a vertical cliff or something. This is the kind of thing that they're portraying Hobie Daniels performing, or Hobie Doyle performing. It doesn't require much in the way of dialogue. It's gunfights and horse races and stuff. But he gets cast on the sound stage, and he's trying to adapt to it, and that's part of the comic element of the movie. But it's one of the subplots involved. Scarlett Johansson is also in a subplot as a starlet who has unexpectedly come down pregnant and has no husband. And Mannix is trying to manage this for her, and that's part of the comedy of it. And it also refocuses the theme of fantasy versus reality. Mannix goes and sees Scarlett Johansson. He says, "Have you thought about who you're going to marry? Because you got to marry somebody." And this speaks to the social norms of the time. He says, well, we have to have you married to somebody because your image is that of the innocent woman. But we can't have a single mother, replace your Hollywood image. And she's compliant to some degree. They come up with this crazy scheme and such, but it ends up working out. I don't have to spoil it for you. That's one you should go and find for yourself.
Well, interestingly, on that minor plot, again, it's an interesting moment where there's a sort of how we're introduced to her as she is starring in this sort of, I guess you could say, kind of like mythically informed synchronized swimming film, right? It's very, elegant, and there's an orchestra next to the swimming pool, and she ends up sort of at the climactic moment, which is an interesting repeat, right? That over and over again we see these climactic moments and scenes sort of subverted at the last minute. And when she's talking to Mance on the side, she says, "I just need a reliable man." He goes through sort of comedically the other figures she's been married to. He's been married to a major mob figure. a drug addicted musician, and now she's been, gotten pregnant with another director probably. And, at first they think, well, we'll have this director, marry her, only to find out that he is in fact married. He has a wife back in Sweden. Obviously it's impossible, but Scarlett Johansson is not necessarily playing the most sympathetic character, at least initially, but you see a very interesting inversion where when she is faced with, or when she interacts with a genuinely reliable man, right? The most reliable man in Hollywood, we see her character change in a very interesting direction. And like I said, I won't spoil it. You should watch it. It's a fun film. It's one you can watch with your wife. Your wife will like this film, to you, listener. But again, it's a moment where this movie is less cynical than it initially appears and less cynical than many have read it to be.
Yes, certainly. It comes into focus in curious minor scenes. There are these interactions Mannix has with gossip columnists, both portrayed by Tilda Swinton, who always does a fantastic job. She's such a great actress. She comes to Mannix and she says, well, I've got the goods on Baird Whitlock. I'm going to write my column tomorrow, and I'm fishing about for more information. I'm giving you an opportunity to change my story here if you give me more information. And she tells Mannix, the people want the truth. And Mannix replies, people don't want the facts. They want to believe. Again, emphasizing faith. And we've got to have something worthy to believe in. And what is Hollywood offering? It's Plato's cave. It's believing that Baird Whitlock is an upright family man, which anyone that looks into the details of his life is going to know that he's not. The same with Scarlett Johansson. She's not an innocent person. The way that Mannix kind of casually says, well, that's your image. That's what we made you to be. You're an innocent woman. That's why everyone loves you. And then they absurdly talk about the sordid details of her personal life. But it's true, nevertheless. People do want something to believe. Richard Weaver, who is one of my favorite writers, great Southern agrarian writer, he said, it's the raw stuff of life that is exactly what civilized people want and need to have refined. And we don't want the mere undigested facts. We want something higher to believe in. We want to order these things. We want a system to have faith in. And this is the major conflict in the major groups we've encountered already in the film, the communists, the religious Christians. So the plot comes to a head with the curious character Bert Gurney, portrayed by that flaky looking fellow. I guess he has a great profile. Is his name Channing Tatum? Is that his name?
Yes. Yeah. And the way that this character is introduced is legitimately hilarious because so that he is he is one of these kind of, gay Hollywood actors, and you're introduced to him in this sort of, Roger and Hammerstein musical. And at first it's, from the film's perspective, played relatively straight. Double Entendre is intended. But as you get further and further through the musical number, it's a group of sailors singing about how they aren't going to see any women while they're out at sea. And then the dancing getting more and more comedically homoerotic. It's genuinely, it's a hilarious and relatively subtle joke in the film, right? They never go out and say it, but it is sort of funny the dissonance you see between this, more and more kind of fabulous Glee Club style dance, and then the very kind of like dour Norman Rockwell-esque film director, and also Josh Brolin's reaction. It's legitimately hilarious.
Yes, it is. It's one of the great old lampoons of the golden age of Hollywood in this film. The synchronized swimming is another element that's just beautifully done, and it's remarkable that it really can be done anymore. The huge synchronized dance number with Tatum and the whole sick crew. That is also very well done as well. Well, Bert Gurney, the Channing Tatum's character, is actually the ringleader of the communists. And his house is the setting for the communist book reading group and Clooney's captivity. Gurney returns to his house with the intention of defecting to the Soviets, and he's actually arranged for a Soviet nuclear submarine to come pick him up. It might not be a nuclear submarine. It's certainly a Soviet submarine. I believe it's a minor role, and you don't never see this guy, Dolph Lundgren, who is he's the guy from the Rocky film. He portrays the Soviet super boxer.
Yes, yeah, Ivan Drago. He's also actually, if he's not a chemical engineer, I think he's a nuclear physicist. He's legitimately a very intelligent man.
He's a very curious character. My brother loves this guy, and he hasn't been in very many movies. I think he played a James Bond villain once, back in the 70s. But you never see his face, but he portrays the Soviet captain of the submarine. So the communists, they row Bert Gurney out into Malibu Bay, and they rendezvous with the submarine. And in the process, they lose the ransom that they got for Whitlock. They're supposed to send it to the Comintern.
And it's incredibly funny. Because there's multiple layers of jokes to this. One of them, which is kind of just a background joke, is that they have to row him out in this old-timey rowboat. And because they're all academics and writers, they have to wear gloves to row a boat 100 yards, which is funny. They're also, despite being communists, they don't, like, they row in the most unsynchronized way possible. There's literally no coordination between them, which is a joke. But also, Tatum's dog is it named Engels, I think, isn't it?
Yes, his dog's name is Engels.
It's this little, like, white, floofy dog. And there's this very grand, dramatic moment where the kind of second in command of the communists says, here, brother, take this as our small donation to the Comintern. So he takes it. He's supposed to leave his little floofy dog. And then the dog breaks out, runs away. And Tatum, who's been, at least to this point, very, austere, kind of strong-jawed, flips his wrists out, catches the dog, and then the money drops into the ocean. And the last thing we see of this submarine is them walking in, and just the sound of this barking dog get quieter and quieter as they close the hatch to the submarine. It's a very funny moment.
And they distinctively play Soviet era choral music in the scene. It always always stimulates me to go and find playlists on YouTube of that Soviet era music, because I like it. I have a guilty pleasure in listening to it, but it illustrates something important, that as Weaver said, the Soviets were the first true realists in hundreds of years, and no dodging about in the excluded middle will save Western liberalism. A possible allusion to James Burnham there, who Weaver was familiar with. The Soviets are very hard, logical believers in a doctrine. And they believe that they're going to save the world, that this is going to, their success will mean the end of history, which means the end of conflict, the end of war, the end of suffering and evil. It is an apocalyptic vision, the solution of all of history. And this inspires them to feats of sacrifice, courage, and the art that surrounds it, which has certain religious kinds of undertones. Of course, these are not people who believe in the spiritual world. They deny that the soul exists. You know, they're completely thoroughgoing materialists, but they're also messianic. And that is part of the dichotomy here with the two systems of belief presented in the film. The communist system, which isn't given much serious treatment. I think they present orthodox Marxism more or less. It's very clear what these people are talking about, even though the dialogue is unfortunately short. I would have liked more in the communist reading group. But it's one of these two systems presented here that are in conflict, obviously. But Hollywood isn't representing, Christian belief or social norms. They're kind of representing it in spite of themselves. Well, we finally get to the climactic scenes of the film. After the defection of Gurney, he gets on the submarine, he goes away. The communists are all rounded up by the police immediately after. The cell is busted. Whitlock is returned by Hobie Doyle, who goes to the house in the nick of time, gets Whitlock out of there. And then Whitlock is confronted by Eddie Mannix. Whitlock mindlessly, and he's just an absurd character with no ideas of his own, he is explaining Marxism to Mannix in his office. And he says, oh, well, I found out, how the world works, that history is science, that we know what's going to happen next. And all we're doing here is we're manufacturing lollipops for the masses, so the fat cats can get rich and exploit the proletariat. And this all amounts to what they used to call bread and circuses, just to distract the masses of people and to take their money. And in the midst of this thoughtless stream of consciousness from Clooney, Josh Brolin gets up and starts slapping him across the face and says, I hear another word out of you on this nonsense. I'm going to have you arrested for colluding in your own abduction. And Clooney, in the midst of his explanation, he says, we have this delusion that we're producing something of artistic value, or that there's some spiritual significance to what we're doing. And of course, the implication here is the Marxist denial of the spiritual realm. They're completely materialist. Brolin gets up and then gives this really interesting and spirited command to Clooney. He says, you're going to go and give your speech at the foot of the cross, and you're going to believe every word you say. And then Brolin gives what I think amounts to another sort of philosophical realism. He says, you're going to do it because you are an actor and you do what you do, just like the director does what he does. You do it because the picture has worth, and you have worth when you serve the picture. Now go out there and be a star. And ultimately his charge is you got to believe there's something bigger in life. It's more than money. It's more than the material world. It's not about the owner of the studio. It's not about the money that we make from the picture. It's about intrinsic worth. That this is actually something, ultimately, we're trying to do something beautiful here. And it's only going to be beautiful. It's only going to be worthy if we believe. Which is a wonderful comparison to what a worthwhile life looks like. That our actions have significance when we have faith in the ultimate meaning. And ironically, just before this scene with Mannix, we have this absurd little vignette of a man on the set of the crucifixion. They're getting ready, to shoot this climactic scene in Hail Caesar, and the one of the errand boys, he's distributing lunch to the set, and he goes up to the actor who's all strapped to the cross, and he's crucified on the cross. It's incredible, difficult position to hold, and who knows how long he's been there. They're obviously all exhausted because the star hasn't shown up yet. They're all just waiting for the moment. And he goes up to the man portraying Jesus Christ, and he says, "Well, what kind of lunch do you have anyway?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't know." He's obviously very exhausted and in pain. And he says, "Well, are you a principal or are you an extra?" And this is ultimately, this is obviously the major question of the whole film. It seems to me, the fact that it's put right where it is to stick into our heads, the absurdity of it, which makes us laugh, is the man portraying Jesus Christ in this Hollywood epic. Is he a principal actor? Is he the point? And the illusion, of course, is the broader one. Is he the point of human life? Is he supposed to be the point of our lives? Or is he just an extra? And the actor says, "Oh, I'm a principal." He goes, "Oh, okay, well, you get the better lunch then." Not that he can eat it, he's strapped to the cross. Well, then Clooney, after his meeting with Mannix, he shows up, he gives his speech. It's it's rather what you would expect from a Hollywood piece of the day, but it gives like basic Christian affirmation. A Roman legionary who has come into faith in Jesus Christ at the moment of his crucifixion. And George Clooney gives this speech in front of the cross, and he says, "Christ came to ease the suffering of all men. He loves sinners. He knows all that I've done, and yet he loved me. That he is God revealed to us in this strange people, in this distant land. And we could see the truth of God if we had," and then he forgets his line. And of course, the missing word, faith. If we only had faith, then we could see the point of human existence. We would have the ultimate meaning that we can have in our lives. And I think that if we interpret this straightforwardly, we see this is actually a very encouraging film, encouraging to people of faith, though it is obviously a comedy and it makes us laugh. I think that it does what it does brilliantly. I think it's insightful. It's moreover entertaining, but it's getting at the most fundamental questions of life. And that's one of the reasons why I immediately enjoyed it when I saw it some years ago. I guess it's 10 years old now.
Yeah, you had shown it in class, a decade ago. And I was, 16, 17 at the time. And I enjoyed it, but I didn't absorb much. I understood the Marxism angle. I thought it was funny that Herbert Marcuse is in this film, which is admittedly quite funny. But I didn't take away much more than that. And then rewatching it, I think my review mirrors yours. It's genuinely a very touching film. It has the same Coen brothers regionalism that makes me love so many of their movies. And honestly, this movie's not particularly well reviewed. It sort of has, middling to low praise if you look at the critics, which you shouldn't. But I think it's quite a good film. I highly recommend it. And honestly, George, this has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for coming on to discuss it.
It was a lot of fun. I really appreciate the invitation. It's a pleasure to talk about this stuff. Thanks for having me.
Well, definitely. Of course. As you said off air, you have added many more books to Tall Men Books. So if you're interested in deep historical primary sources that you cannot get anywhere else, I highly recommend you check out Tall Men Books. You also have a social media presence on Substack and Twitter, as well as your Telegram, which is, I find incredibly amusing. It's very good. Those will all be linked down in the description. As far as my stuff, Jay Burden Show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you listen to podcasts. This is what I do now. If you want the episodes without ads, which I realize are irritating, but they sort of fund this whole thing, it's $5 a month, Patreon, Substack, or Gumroad. That's pretty below market rate, honestly, especially for how much content I put out. I basically stuck it the lowest it'll go. So, you know what? It's not a perfect solution, but it's what we've got. You can also check out our sponsor, Axios Remote Fitness Coaching. JD's a good guy. You should support him. His business is very good. He knows what he's talking about. And again, Bagby, thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Good to talk to you too. Thank you.
Everyone at home, keep your head up. I can't last forever. Good night.